Before we begin, if you're finding these accounts from rural law enforcement valuable, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It helps us continue sharing these stories. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Now, let's talk about what happened in Custer County, Montana, in the winter of 1990. I am Tom Whitaker, and I served as sheriff of Custer County, Montana for over 20 years, until the census results were announced. What happened after the numbers came in is a strange story I will tell you. When the federal government counted people who shouldn't have been counted. When bureaucracy opened a door that should have remained closed. Custer County is located in the southeastern corner of Montana, where the plains stretch out and the Yellowstone River cuts through a landscape that looks much the same as it did 150 years ago. In 1990, we had a population of 11,696 spread over 3,783 square miles. I knew most of their names. In a county this size with such a small population, it's common to know people. You see them at the grocery store, at high school football games, at the county fair. You know their families, their histories, their problems. I'd been elected sheriff in 1970, fresh back from Vietnam, young and full of ideas about service and duty. 20 years later, I was 48 years old, settled into the job, comfortable with the rhythms of rural law enforcement. Cattle theft, DUIs, domestic disputes, the occasional meth lab. Nothing I couldn't handle, nothing that kept me up at night. That all changed on November 15, 1990, when the census results arrived at my office. It was a Thursday, cold and gray, with snow threatening from clouds that hung low over the plains. My deputy, Jenny Crawford, brought in the mail around 10 a.m., sorting through the usual pile of official correspondence, warrants, and administrative paperwork. "Census results are here," she said, dropping a thick manila envelope on my desk. "Should be interesting to see if we grew or shrank." Population trends mattered to us. Growth meant more tax revenue, more federal funding, more resources. Decline meant the opposite, meant watching our communities slowly empty out as young people left for Billings or Bozeman or further. The 1990 census was supposed to give us a clear picture of where we stood. I opened the envelope and pulled out the official report. The numbers were broken down by township, by age, by household. I flipped to the summary page. Total population, Custer County, Montana, 11,847. I frowned. That wasn't right. According to our county records, updated monthly based on births, deaths, and people registering to vote or get driver's license, 11,847, we had 11,696 residents. I'd reviewed those numbers myself just 2 weeks ago. "Jenny, pull up the county population file." She walked over to the filing cabinet and retrieved the folder, laying it on my desk next to the census report. I compared them line by line. County records. 11,696 census count. 11,847. Difference, 151. 151 people that the census had counted, but we had no record of. That was too large a discrepancy to be a data entry error. Even accounting for homeless populations, temporary workers, people who'd moved in recently, we should have been within 10 or 20 of the federal count. But 151, that was roughly 1% of our entire population, just unaccounted for. Could be people who didn't register to vote, Jenny suggested. Or folks living off the grid. We've got some hermit types up in the hills. Not 151 of them, I said. And census takers are thorough. They count everyone, even people who don't want to be counted. These numbers should match or be very close. I spent the rest of the day cross-referencing the census data with our county records. The census included names and addresses for every person counted. I started making a list of the ones who didn't appear in our files. By 5 p.m., I had 151 names, 151 people who had been counted, who had given census takers their information, who had addresses in Custer County, but who I'd never heard of, who had no driver's licenses, no voter registrations, no property tax records, no utility bills in their names. Nothing. Jenny looked over my shoulder at the list. That's impossible. The census takers would have noticed if they were counting ghosts. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe these are people using fake names or illegal immigrants or something. We need to check these addresses. The next morning, Jenny and I started making visits. The first name on my list was Thomas Mackenzie, listed as living at 412 Yellowstone Avenue in Miles City, the county seat. I knew every house on Yellowstone Avenue. 412 was a small craftsman-style home, painted blue, owned by an elderly couple named the Hartleys. I knocked on the door. Mrs. Hartley answered, surprised to see the sheriff on her porch. "Tom, is everything all right?" "Morning, Dorothy. Just following up on some census information. Did you have anyone staying with you back in April when they did the count?" "No, just me and Earl." "Why?" "Census has a Thomas Mackenzie listed at this address." Her face went puzzled. "Never heard of him. Maybe they got the number wrong?" "Maybe. Thanks, Dorothy." We visited 12 addresses that morning. Same story at each one. The people living there had been counted, but they'd never heard of the additional names the census had recorded at their addresses. By lunchtime, we had a pattern. All 151 extra people were listed at existing addresses, but the actual residents had no knowledge of them. "This is clerical error on a massive scale," Jenny said, as we ate sandwiches in the truck. "The census people must have duplicated entries or something. All with different names, different ages, different information. That's not clerical error, that's systematic." "Then what is it?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. That afternoon, I called the Census Bureau Regional Office in Denver. After being transferred 3 times, I got a supervisor named Patricia Chen. "Sheriff Whitaker, how can I help you?" "I'm calling about the Custer County, Montana results. We've got a significant discrepancy. You counted 11,847, but our records show 11,696. That's 151 extra people. Have you verified your county records are up to date?" "I have. These 151 people don't exist in any of our systems. No driver's licenses, no voter registrations, nothing. And when we check the addresses, the residents there say they never heard of them." There was a pause. "That's unusual. Let me pull up the Custer County data." I heard typing, then silence. "Sheriff, I'm seeing the entries you're referring to. All 151 have complete information. Names, ages, addresses. Our census takers interviewed them in person. This is verified data." "Who were the census takers for those entries?" More typing. 3 different takers. Mary Peterson, John Blackwood, and, this is odd, the third name isn't coming up in our employee database. It just says Field Enumerator 1880. My blood went cold. 1880? That's a typo, right? Must be. Should be 1980 or 1990. I'll flag it for correction. But Sheriff, I can assure you these census entries are legitimate. If your county records don't match, perhaps your records are incomplete. My records are fine. There's something wrong with your count. The census is conducted according to strict federal guidelines. If you believe there's an error, you'll need to file a formal challenge with documentation. I hung up, frustrated. Jenny was watching me. What did they say? They stand by their numbers. They say all 151 people were interviewed and verified, but one of the census taker names is listed as Field Enumerator 1880. 1880? That's got to be a computer glitch. That's what I thought, but I want to check something. We drove to the Custer County Historical Society, housed in an old Victorian mansion on the edge of Miles City. The director, Margaret Sanderson, was a retired teacher who'd spent 40 years collecting and preserving local history. Tom, Jenny, what brings you by? Margaret, do you have census records from 1880? Of course. Montana Territory Census. We've got the original documents, actually. Donated by a family whose ancestor was a census taker. Why? I need to see the Custer County entries. She led us to the archive room and pulled out a large leather-bound volume, carefully opening it on a research table. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded, but the handwriting was clear and precise. Census of Montana Territory, 1880, Custer County, Enumeration District 7. I started reading through the names. Mining families, ranchers, merchants, all recorded in neat rows with ages, occupations, and addresses. Then I saw it. Thomas Mackenzie, age 35, miner, 412 Yellowstone Avenue. My hands started shaking. I flipped through more pages. Sarah Brennan, age 28. Seamstress, 1804. Main Street, William Cross, age 42. Blacksmith, 567 Railroad Avenue. Elizabeth Harris, age 19. Domestic, 223 Pine Street. Every name, every single one of the 151 names from the 1990 census was in the 1880 census. Same names, same addresses, similar ages. Jenny was reading over my shoulder, her face pale. This is impossible. These are the same people. Can't be. That was 110 years ago. Margaret had been watching us, concerned. What's going on? The 1990 census counted these people, all of them, but they were counted in 1882. Margaret's expression shifted from concern to something deeper. Fear, maybe, or recognition. You need to see something else, she said quietly. She pulled out a file box marked Mining Disaster, 1880, and extracted a newspaper clipping, preserved in plastic. The headline read, Tragedy at Aurora. 151 dead in collapse. June 17, 1880. The article detailed a catastrophic cave-in at the Aurora mine, 15 miles north of Miles City. The entire second shift had been underground when the main shaft collapsed. No survivors. The bodies were never recovered because the mine was too unstable to enter. I scanned the list of the dead, printed in small type at the bottom of the article. All 151 names. Thomas Mackenzie, Sarah Brennan, William Cross, Elizabeth Harris. Every single person who'd been counted in the 1990 census had died in that mine collapse in 1880. But the census, Jenny whispered. The census was in April 1880, before the disaster. They were counted before they died. Margaret nodded slowly. The census enumeration took months. The enumerator for this district didn't submit his final report until August. By then, these people were dead, but they'd been counted. They existed in the federal record even though they were gone. I stared at the newspaper clipping, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. So, the 1990 census somehow repeated the count? Used the old data? That doesn't make sense, Jenny said. Census forms are new every time. There's no way for 110-year-old data to get into a modern count. Unless, I thought, but didn't say, something else was at work. Something that had nothing to do with data entry errors or clerical mistakes. We drove back to the office in silence. It was getting dark, snow starting to fall, and the heater in the truck barely kept up with the cold. I kept thinking about those names, those people who'd been counted twice, 110 years apart. People who'd died before they could be officially recorded as dead, who'd existed in a kind of bureaucratic limbo. Back at the office, I spread the documents across my desk. The 1990 census, the 1880 census, the newspaper clipping. The evidence was clear but impossible. Jenny made coffee, strong and black. So, what do we do? Report this to who? The Census Bureau? The FBI? This is insane, Tom. Dead people from 1880 being counted in 1990? I don't know, but I think we need to... The phone rang. I picked it up. Sheriff's office. Sheriff Whitaker? A man's voice unfamiliar. This is Thomas Mackenzie. I understand you've been looking for me. I nearly dropped the phone. Who is this? Thomas Mackenzie. You visited my address this morning. 412 Yellowstone Avenue. The Hartleys told me you came by. The Hartleys said they never heard of you. They wouldn't have. I don't exist yet, not fully. But I'm becoming, we all are. All 151 of us. You counted us, Sheriff. The census made us real. This isn't funny. Who are you really? I told you. Thomas Mackenzie. Born 1845, died June 17, 1880, in the Aurora mine collapse. But not really died because we were counted. The census taker came in April, wrote down our names, our ages, our lives, made us official, made us real, and then we died before that reality could be completed. We've been waiting, Sheriff, waiting in the space between counted and recorded. And now, 110 years later, you counted us again. Counted us in 1990, made us real in 1990. That's impossible. Is it? You've seen the evidence. You know we were counted in both censuses. The question is, what happens now? Do we fade away again? Or do we get to finish the lives we were denied? You're not real. You're dead. You died in 1880. We were real enough for the census to count us. Twice. That makes us real, Sheriff, and we're coming back. All 151 of us. We're going to live the lives that were taken from us. We're going to finish what was started. How? How is any of this possible? The census is a powerful thing, Sheriff. It's the government saying you exist. It's official recognition of life. When you're counted, you become real in a way that transcends just living. You become a statistic, a data point, a fact. And facts don't die easily. We were counted but never officially declared dead. We existed in the record but not in reality. Now, both records say we exist. 1880 and 1990. That's a strong enough foundation to build a life on. I'm going to find out who you really are. This is harassment. You already know who I am. You've seen my name in 2 censuses. You've read about my death. You know the truth, even if you don't want to accept it. And soon, Sheriff, you'll see me. See all of us. We're becoming more real every day. The census gave us permission to exist. Now we're taking that permission and making it tangible. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone, my hand shaking. Jenny was staring at me. What did he say? He said they're becoming real, all 151 of them. Said the census gave them permission to exist. Tom, this is crazy. Dead people don't come back because of paperwork. I know, but something's happening, something wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those names, those people caught between life and death, between 1880 and 1990. Around 2 a.m., I got out of bed and drove to 412 Yellowstone Avenue. The Hartley house was dark and quiet. I sat in my truck across the street watching. Snow was falling steadily now, accumulating on the windshield. Then I saw him. A man walked up to the Hartley house, visible in the streetlight. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, wool trousers, and a heavy coat with a style I'd seen in historical photographs. He stopped at the front gate and looked directly at my truck. Even from this distance, I could see his face. It matched the description from the 1880 census. Mid-30s, strong build, the face of a miner, Thomas Mackenzie. He raised his hand in a wave. Then he turned and walked through the Hartley's front door, not opened it, walked through it, like it wasn't there. I got out of the truck and ran to the house, my heart pounding. I knocked hard on the door. A minute later, Earl Hartley answered, wearing a bathrobe and looking annoyed. "Tom, it's 2 a.m. What's going on?" "Did you see him, the man who just came to your door?" "What man? There's nobody here but me and Dorothy." "I saw him walk through your front door." "Tom, you're not making sense. There's nobody here. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost. Maybe that's exactly what I'd seen. I drove home, exhausted and confused. When I walked in, my wife, Sarah, was waiting in the kitchen. "Tom, where were you?" "Work, following up on something." She looked at me with concern. "You're scaring me. You look like you've aged 10 years. What's going on?" "Sarah, do you believe in ghosts?" "What?" "Ghosts. Spirits. People coming back from the dead." She took my hand. "Tom, what happened tonight?" "I saw a dead man, a man who died in 1880, and he walked through a door like it wasn't there." "You're exhausted. You need sleep." "I'm not crazy, Sarah. Something's wrong in this county. Something's coming back, and I don't know how to stop it." The next morning, I went to the office early. Jenny was already there, looking worse than I felt. "I saw one, too," she said before I could speak. "Last night, at my apartment, a woman in old-fashioned dress standing in my living room. She looked at me and said, 'I'm sorry, but you have to go. I need this space. I was counted first.' What happened? She faded away, like she wasn't solid yet. But Tom, she was real. I could see her, hear her, and she knew my name. She said, 'You're Jennifer Crawford, so am I. But I came first, 1880, you'll understand soon.'" I pulled up the 1880 census and searched for the name. There it was. Jennifer Crawford, age 24. Schoolteacher. I looked at modern Jenny, age 29, deputy sheriff. But there'd been another Jenny Crawford in 1880, one of the 151 dead. "They're replacing us," Jenny whispered. "They're not just coming back. They're taking over, taking our places, becoming us." That's when I realized the true horror of what was happening. The census had counted them, made them real, but there was only room in Custer County for 11,696 people, the official number. If 151 new people became real, 151 current people would have to stop being real. The ghosts of 1880 weren't just coming back, they were replacing us, one by one, and I had no idea how to stop it. Jenny's transformation started 3 days after she saw her 1880 double. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as stress or lack of sleep. She forgot modern terminology, called the police radio a telegraph box, referred to our patrol vehicles as carriages. I thought she was joking until I saw the confusion in her eyes when I corrected her. By the end of the week, she couldn't remember how to use her service weapon. She stood in the office holding her Glock, staring at it like it was an alien artifact. "What manner of pistol is this?" she asked. "The mechanism is incomprehensible. Jenny, you've been using that gun for 5 years. 5 years? No, Sheriff. I've only been in Miles City for 6 months. I came from Chicago to teach at the schoolhouse. The children are waiting for me." "Jenny, you're a deputy sheriff. You're not a teacher." She looked at me with eyes that were hers, but also weren't. I'm Jennifer Crawford, age 24. I teach reading and arithmetic to the miners' children. And I died in the Aurora mine collapse because I was visiting my brother that day. He worked the second shift. We both died together. Then, like a switch flipping, she blinked, and she was modern Jenny again. Tom, what just happened? I was somewhere else, remembering things that didn't happen to me. You're being replaced, I said quietly. The 1880 Jennifer Crawford is taking over, bit by bit. How do we stop it? I don't know. But I was lying. I had an idea, horrible as it was. If the census made them real, maybe removing them from the census could make them unreal. But the 1990 census was already submitted, already official. I couldn't just erase 151 names from federal records. Could I? I spent that weekend at the county clerk's office going through every available record: birth certificates, death certificates, property deeds, voter registrations. I was looking for a way to prove these 151 people didn't exist, to create a paper trail that would contradict the census. But every time I documented someone's absence, something strange happened. The next day, evidence of their presence would appear. Thomas Mackenzie's name showed up on a mining company payroll from 1880. Sarah Brennan's seamstress business appeared in an old telephone directory that I knew hadn't listed her before. It was like reality itself was rewriting to accommodate them. On Monday morning, Jenny didn't come to work. I drove to her apartment and found the door unlocked. Inside, everything had changed. The modern furniture was gone, replaced with Victorian-era pieces, kerosene lamps instead of electric lights, a wood stove instead of a kitchenette. And sitting at a small desk, writing in a ledger with a fountain pen, was Jenny. Except it wasn't Jenny. Not anymore. She looked up at me, and I saw a stranger behind familiar eyes. Sheriff Whitaker, how may I help you? Jenny, it's me, Tom. I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else. My name is Jennifer Crawford, and I teach at the Miles City School for Mining Families. Is there a problem? Jenny, fight it. You're a deputy sheriff. You're from 1990, not 1880. She looked at me with pity. Sir, I don't know what you mean by 1990. The year is 1880. Has been since January. It's 1990, November 1990. She stood up and walked to her window, pulling back the curtain. Look outside, Sheriff. Tell me what year it is. I looked, and my blood ran cold. The street outside wasn't the modern residential road I'd driven down. It was a dirt path, lined with wooden buildings and hitching posts. Men in period clothing walked past on foot or horseback. A sign across the street read, Miles City General Mercantile, Estate 1877. This isn't possible, I whispered. Of course it's possible. It's real. This is Miles City, Montana Territory, 1880. Where else would it be? I backed out of the apartment and ran to my truck. But when I got outside, the modern world flickered back into view. The paved street, the modern buildings, the parked cars. It was like I'd been looking through a window into the past, and now the window had closed. I drove straight to the Historical Society. Margaret was there, as always, surrounded by old documents and photographs. Tom, you look terrible. Margaret, it's happening. They're replacing us. Jenny's gone. She's fully transformed into her 1880 version. And when I was at her apartment, I saw 1880. Like the past was bleeding through. Margaret nodded slowly. I've been researching this ever since you showed me those census records. I think I understand what's happening. She spread out several documents on her desk. Maps, census records, newspaper articles. Look at this. The 1880 census was conducted in April. The mine collapse happened in June. Those 151 people were counted, made official, recognized by the federal government as existing. Then they died before the census was formally submitted and recorded in August. So they existed in a limbo state. Exactly. They were counted, but never officially declared dead. In the bureaucratic sense, they're still alive, still waiting for their existence to be completed. But that was 110 years ago. Time doesn't matter to bureaucracy, Tom. Once something is written down, made official, it exists forever in the records. And when the 1990 census counted them again, it reinforced their existence, gave them another foundation to build on. Two censuses, 110 years apart, both saying the same thing. These people exist. So they're using that to come back, to replace us. Not replace, reassert. From their perspective, they were here first. They were counted first. They have seniority. And there's only room in Custer County for 11,696 people, the official population. If 151 ghost citizens become real, 151 modern citizens have to become ghosts. How do we stop it? Margaret's expression was grave. I don't think we can. Once something is in the census, it's real. The federal government has declared it so, and you can't fight the federal government's definition of reality. I left the Historical Society with a sick feeling in my gut. If Margaret was right, we were powerless. The census had made the 1880 citizens real, and they were reclaiming their existence by displacing us. By Tuesday, 3 more people had transformed. Earl Hartley became his 1880 counterpart, a railroad worker. Dorothy Hartley became a boarding house operator. A local mechanic named James Walsh became James Walsh, frontier blacksmith. Each transformation followed the same pattern. First, confusion about modern technology. Then gaps in memory. Then full replacement, with the 1880 personality taking over completely. And wherever they were, the environment around them started shifting. Modern buildings showed Victorian interiors. Paved roads became dirt paths. 1880 was bleeding through, overlaying 1990 like a ghost image. I held a town meeting on Wednesday night. About 300 people showed up, filling the high school gymnasium. I explained what was happening as clearly as I could, knowing how insane it sounded. The 1990 census counted 151 people who died in 1880. Now those people are coming back, reclaiming their existence. They're replacing modern residents, taking over their lives, their spaces, and we don't know how to stop it. The room erupted, people shouting, demanding answers, accusing me of being crazy. I didn't blame them. It sounded crazy even to me. Then someone in the back stood up, an older man I didn't recognize. "Sheriff's telling the truth," he said. "My name is William Cross. I was a blacksmith in Miles City. Died in the Aurora mine visiting my son. Been waiting 110 years to finish what I started. We're not here to hurt anyone. We're just here to complete our lives." People started screaming, backing away from him. I raised my hands, trying to maintain order. "William, if that's really your name, you can't just take over people's lives. These are real people with families, jobs, futures." "So were we," William said calmly. "We had families. We had futures. Then the mine collapsed and took everything. But we were counted, Sheriff. The census said we existed. That makes us real, and now we're here to collect on that promise. You're dead. You've been dead for 110 years. Are we? Where's the death certificates? Where's the burial records? The mine collapsed before anyone could officially record our deaths. In the eyes of the government, we're not dead. We're just unaccounted for. Until now. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People running out of the gymnasium, some trying to attack William Cross, others just fleeing in terror. I tried to maintain order, but it was useless. That night, I went home to Sarah and found her sitting at our kitchen table, looking at old photographs. "Tom, these photos appeared in our album. Look at this one." She handed me a photograph in a wooden frame. It showed a couple in Victorian-era clothing, standing in front of a house. The man looked like me. The woman looked like Sarah. "Where did this come from?" "It was in our album, in the section with our wedding photos. But Tom, look at the date on the back." I turned it over, written in faded ink. Thomas and Sarah Whitaker. Wedding day, June 3rd, 1878. "This is us," Sarah whispered, "or versions of us, from 1880. "Sarah, there weren't Thomas and Sarah Whitakers in the 1880 census. I checked. We're safe." "Are we?" "Tom, I've been having dreams of a different life. I'm not Sarah Whitaker, Deputy District Attorney. I'm Sarah Whitaker, schoolteacher. We live in a small house on Pine Street. You're not a sheriff, you're a miner, and we die together in the collapse. Those aren't your memories. They feel like my memories. Tom, what if we're not safe? What if there are versions of us in 1880 too? What if we're replacing ourselves?" I grabbed this 1880 census records and searched frantically. And there they were, names I'd missed before because I wasn't looking for them. Thomas Whitaker, age 38, minor. Sarah Whitaker, age 35, schoolteacher. Both listed as residents of Miles City. Both presumed dead in the Aurora mine collapse. "No," I said. "No, this can't be happening." But Sarah was changing in front of my eyes, her modern clothes flickering, becoming a long Victorian dress, her hair styling itself into a period-appropriate bun, her face still hers but wearing an expression from another century. "Tom, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice already sounding different. "I don't want to replace you, but I was counted first. I have seniority. Fight it, Sarah. Stay with me. Stay in 1990. I don't think I can. The census is too strong. It's pulling me back to when I was first counted, when I first existed officially, and that was 1880. She reached out and touched my face. "I love you. In both times, in all times, but I can't fight what I am." Then she was gone. Not physically gone, but the person I knew. My Sarah, the modern woman I'd married in 1975, she was gone. In her place was Sarah Whitaker, schoolteacher, 1880. "Sir," she said formally, "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Sarah Whitaker. I teach at the Miles City School. Are you the new sheriff?" I couldn't speak. I just watched as my wife became a stranger, as 110 years of life together evaporated like morning dew. By Thursday, half the town had transformed. The grocery store became a general mercantile. The gas station became a livery stable. Modern cars flickered in and out, sometimes appearing as horse-drawn carriages. Main Street was paved one moment, dirt the next. I was walking through town, watching reality fracture around me, when I encountered Thomas Mackenzie again. He was standing in front of what used to be a bank, watching workers inside transform it into an assay office. "Sheriff Whitaker, you're still fighting it." "Damn right I am. You're destroying people's lives." "We're reclaiming our lives. There's a difference. You're dead. You've been dead for 110 years. Death is just bureaucratic status, Sheriff. As long as the census says we exist, and 2 censuses are stronger than 1 death. Why? Why are you doing this? Because we have unfinished business. We had lives, families, futures. The mind took all that from us, but the census gave us a second chance, a way back, and we're taking it. at the cost of innocent people. Everyone's innocent until the census counts them. Then they become data, numbers, statistics, just like us. We're all just entries in a ledger, Sheriff. The question is, which ledger is more official? 1880 or 1990? This is insane. This is wrong. No, Sheriff, this is bureaucracy. This is the logical conclusion of making existence official, of counting people and making them real through paperwork. Once you're counted, once you're in the system, you exist forever. You can't be erased. You can only be replaced. I walked away from him, my mind reeling. The town was changing faster now. Victorian buildings appearing where modern ones stood. Gas lights replacing electric street lamps. Horses replacing cars. By Friday, I was one of maybe 20 people who hadn't transformed. We gathered at the sheriff's office, a last holdout of 1990 in a town that was becoming 1880. "We can't stay here," a woman named Carol said. "We need to leave. Get out of the county before we transform too." "Where would we go?" I asked. "And what about everyone else? The thousands of people who've already been replaced?" "They're gone, Tom. We can't save them. We can only save ourselves." "No. There has to be a way to reverse this, to make the 1880 census unreal." "How?" "It's federal record. It's been official for 110 years. Then we make a new record, one that contradicts it, one that's more recent, more authoritative. The 1990 census already happened. It's too late." "Maybe not. The census is submitted, but it's not finalized until December. We still have time to challenge it, to prove those 151 people don't exist." "How are we supposed to prove that? They're taking over the whole town." "We document it, photograph it, create evidence that what's happening is impossible, that these people are ghosts, that the census is wrong, and we submit that as a formal challenge to the Census Bureau." It was a desperate plan, probably hopeless, but it was all we had. We spent the weekend photographing the transformations. Buildings flickering between eras, people changing before our eyes. Cars becoming carriages. Street signs changing from modern to period appropriate. But every photograph we took showed only the 1880 version. It was like cameras could only capture what the census said was real. And according to two censuses, 1880 was more real than 1990. By Monday, I was the only one left. Everyone else had either transformed or fled the county. I stood alone in the sheriff's office looking out at Miles City, Montana Territory, 1880. The town was fully transformed now. No modern buildings, no cars, no electric lights. Just a frontier mining town, exactly as it had been 110 years ago. And I was the only person who remembered it being anything else. Thomas Mackenzie walked into my office. He was wearing a sheriff's badge now. "Tom, it's time. You're the last one. The census is complete. 11,696 people, just like the official count. 151 of us from 1880, taking the place of 151 from 1990. Everything is balanced. Everything is correct. I won't become you. I won't be replaced. You don't have a choice. You're Thomas Whitaker, age 38, minor. That's what the 1880 census says. That's what you are. I'm Sheriff Tom Whitaker, age 48, 1990. Not anymore. Look around. What year is it?" I looked out the window. The entire town was 1880. No evidence of 1990 remained except in my memory. "The census was wrong," I said. "The 1990 census made a mistake." "Or maybe," Thomas said, "the 1990 census was correcting a mistake. We should have died in 1880, yes, but we were counted first. We existed first. Now, reality is correcting itself, putting us back where we belong. I'm not from 1880. you are now. And I felt it beginning. The transformation I'd watched happen to everyone else, now happening to me. My memories flickering, my sense of self fracturing. I was Tom Whitaker, Sheriff, 1990. I was Thomas Whitaker, Minor, 1880. I was both. I was neither. The census had counted wrong. Or maybe it had counted right all along, and I was the one who was wrong. About who I was, about when I was, about whether I even existed at all. I fought the transformation for 3 days. 3 long days of my sense of self fracturing like ice on a frozen lake, of 2 completely different sets of memories competing for dominance inside my skull. During those 72 hours, I wasn't one person anymore. I was 2 people occupying the same space, the same body, and neither one of us was winning. During the daylight hours, I was Thomas Whitaker, 38 years old, a miner who'd come to Montana Territory in 1876 chasing rumors of silver and gold. I could feel the weight of the pickaxe in my calloused hands, could taste the metallic dust in my mouth from working underground. I remembered my wife Sarah, the schoolteacher with the patient smile, remembered the small house we'd saved 3 years to afford, remembered planning for children we'd never have because the mine would take us both before we could start that family. Those memories were vivid, detailed, more real than any dream. They had the texture of lived experience, the weight of actual time. At night, when exhaustion finally forced me into something resembling sleep, I was Tom Whitaker, 48 years old, a sheriff who'd served Custer County for 2 decades. I remembered radio calls and the smell of coffee in the patrol car, remembered training Jenny when she first joined the department, remembered my wife Sarah going to law school in her 40s because she'd always wanted to practice law. I remembered my son calling from Billings to tell us he'd gotten engaged, remembered birthdays and Christmas mornings, and the ordinary texture of a modern American life. The 2 sets of memories were equally real, equally mine, and completely incompatible. I couldn't be both men, but I was both men, and the contradiction was tearing me apart from the inside. By Tuesday morning, in one of my increasingly rare moments of clarity when I was fully Sheriff Tom Whitaker of 1990, I knew I had to act. If the census had the power to make things real by documenting them, then maybe I could use that same bureaucratic authority to fight back. I just needed to create a counter-narrative powerful enough to challenge the weight of 110 years of official records. The county clerk's office was in the courthouse basement, a maze of filing cabinets and document boxes that smelled like old paper and dry rot. The building itself was flickering now, phasing between its modern concrete construction and an older wooden structure from the territorial days. I had to time my entry carefully, waiting for a moment when the building was solid and recognizably 1990. I needed to find proof that I existed as Tom Whitaker, born in 1942, not Thomas Whitaker, born in 1852. I needed birth certificates, employment records, marriage licenses, anything that would establish my existence in the modern timeline with the same official authority that the census claimed for the 1880 timeline. The filing system was chaos. Half the labels were typewritten, half were handwritten in various styles spanning decades. I found the Vital Records section and pulled my own file. Inside should have been my birth certificate from St. Vincent Hospital in Billings, my marriage license from 1975, my military discharge papers from Vietnam. Instead, I found documents I'd never seen before, a birth certificate dated 1852, recording the birth of Thomas James Whitaker to parents I didn't recognize in a place called simply Mining Camp 7. A marriage certificate from 1878 uniting Thomas Whitaker and Sarah Ann Morrison in Miles City, Montana Territory. Even a property deed from 1879 showing Thomas Whitaker as the owner of a small house on Pine Street. My hands were shaking as I pulled more files. Every document I checked was the same. Records that should have confirmed my 1990 existence had been replaced by 1880 equivalents. It was like reality itself was being rewritten, not just in people's memories but in the physical documents that were supposed to be permanent, unchangeable proof of existence. It's no use, fighting what's already written. I spun around to find Margaret Sanderson standing in the doorway, except it wasn't quite Margaret. She looked younger, maybe 27 instead of 67, and she was wearing a high-necked Victorian blouse with a long skirt that would have been fashionable in the 1880s. Her hair was pulled back in an elaborate style I'd only seen in historical photographs. Margaret? Margaret Elizabeth Sanderson, if we're being formal about it. Though you can call me Margaret. We were friends, after all, before this all started. She walked into the room, moving with a grace that modern Margaret, with her arthritis and bad hip, hadn't shown in years. I'm the archivist for the Montana Territory Historical Society. 27 years old, never married, entirely too interested in preserving the past to worry much about my own future. And you're Thomas Whitaker, 38 minor. Why are you digging through files that don't concern you? Because I'm not Thomas. I'm Tom. Tom Whitaker, sheriff, born in 1942, not 1852. And you're Margaret Sanderson, retired schoolteacher, born in 1923. You told me about your late husband, about your grandchildren in Seattle. Her expression showed confusion, then a flicker of something else, recognition maybe, or the shadow of other memories trying to surface. I don't. Those things sound familiar, but they're not mine, are they? They are yours, your real memories. The 1880 version is replacing them, but you're still in there somewhere. She sat down heavily in one of the chairs, pressing her hands to her temples. I can feel them. 2 lives, 2 versions of myself. It's like looking at the same photograph twice, slightly out of focus, and my brain can't make them align into a single image. She looked up at me with frightened eyes. Thomas, Tom, whoever you are, what's happening to us? The census counted us wrong. Or maybe it counted us right, but in the wrong time. Now reality is trying to correct itself, and we're caught in the middle. Is there a way to stop it? I don't know. I came here looking for documents that prove we exist in 1990, something with enough official weight to counterbalance the census. But everything's changing. The records are rewriting themselves. Margaret stood up, seeming to make a decision. Then, we need to create new records. If the old documents are changing to match 1880, we'll make new documents that assert 1990. We have the authority. I'm a historical society director, you're the sheriff. We can create official documentation. Will it be enough? I don't know, but it's better than waiting for our 1990 selves to be completely erased. We spent the next 6 hours creating a comprehensive record of modern Custer County. Margaret knew where all the blank forms were kept, knew which documents would carry the most official weight. We filled out contemporary birth certificates, death certificates, property records, anything we could think of that would establish a paper trail proving the 1990 timeline's existence. But even as we worked, I could see the documents beginning to change. Ink that we'd written in blue ballpoint would dry brown, as if aged decades. Modern typewritten text would blur and reform into handwritten script. The paper itself would yellow and become brittle. It was like watching history overwrite our present in real time. It's not working, Margaret said, her voice breaking. We can't fight this with paperwork. The 1880 records have too much time, too much weight behind them. Our documents are too new, too fragile. Then we need something older, something from 1990 that can't be changed because it's already survived for years. Like what? I thought about it. What documents from 1990 would be old enough, established enough, to resist the transformation? Then it hit me. Newspapers. The Miles City newspaper has been publishing since the 1880s. If we can find newspapers from 1990 that prove our timeline exists, documents that have already aged for years, maybe they'll be stable enough to resist changing. We ran to the newspaper office, a building that kept phasing between a modern printing facility and an old-fashioned typesetting shop. The archive room was chaos, with bound volumes of newspapers flickering between different eras, headlines changing even as we watched. But I found what I was looking for: a bound volume of newspapers from January through June 1990. I grabbed it and flipped through, looking for articles that would prove our timeline existed. There was a story about the high school basketball team winning the state championship, an obituary for a man who'd died in a car accident on the interstate, a feature about the new computer system being installed at the county clerk's office, all proof that 1990 existed, that modern technology and modern life were real. But even as I read, the articles began to change. The basketball story became a report about a traveling medicine show. The car accident obituary transformed into a notice about a man killed in a mining accident. The computer story became an article about new telegraph equipment being installed at the territorial office. "It's all changing," Margaret whispered. "Even the newspapers. Even history itself is being rewritten." I slammed the volume shut in frustration. There has to be something that can't be changed, something so fundamental that even this transformation can't touch it. Maybe there isn't. Maybe once the census declares a timeline official, everything else has to conform to it. Maybe reality itself is more flexible than we thought, and the census is what makes it rigid, makes it fixed. We sat there in the newspaper archive room, surrounded by history that wouldn't stay stable, and I felt despair settling in. If even physical documents could be transformed, if even newspapers could be rewritten, then what hope did we have? That's when I had the idea. If the census made things real by documenting them, and if competing censuses created competing realities, then maybe I could force a third option. Create another count, another census, one that documented the people who'd been lost in the transformation. A record of the replaced. A memorial in bureaucratic form. "Margaret, do we have blank census forms here? Any kind of official counting document?" "We have historical census forms in the archive, from various years. Why?" "Because I'm going to conduct my own census, an unauthorized count, Tom Whitaker's Census of the Lost, and I'm going to document everyone from 1990 who's been replaced by their 1880 counterparts. I'm going to make them official, make them real, give them the same bureaucratic weight that the 1880 census has." "Tom, that's not how it works. You can't just create a census. It has to be authorized by the federal government, conducted according to official protocols." "Who says? The census is just documentation of who exists, right?" "Well, I'm documenting who exists, the 1990 people who are being erased. I'm making them official through my own count." Margaret stared at me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "It might not work, but it's worth trying, and if nothing else, it will be a record. Proof that they existed, even if only for a little while." We gathered census forms from the Historical Society's collection, and I started filling them out. Page after page, name after name. Jenny Crawford, aged 29, deputy sheriff. James Walsh, aged 42, mechanic. Dorothy Hartley, aged 71, retired. Every person from 1990 that I could remember, every life that was being erased by the 1880 timeline. 151 names. 151 people who'd lived modern lives, who'd watched television and driven cars and used computers, who were now being replaced by their frontier-era counterparts. I wrote each name carefully, included every detail I could remember, made them official through documentation, through the same bureaucratic process that the original census had used to make the 1880 citizens real. It took me 12 hours. By the time I finished, it was dark outside, and my hand was cramped from writing. The final document was thick, comprehensive, a complete census of the displaced. I dated it November 30th, 1990, and signed it as Sheriff Tom Whitaker, Custer County, Montana. The moment I set down my pen, something changed. The air pressure in the room shifted, like the brief sensation you get in your ears when driving up a mountain. The flickering between timelines that had been constant for days suddenly intensified, then stabilized into something new. I walked to the window and looked out at Main Street. What I saw made my heart race with both hope and fear. The street wasn't 1880 anymore, but it wasn't fully 1990 either. It was both, overlaid on each other like a double-exposed photograph. Buildings were simultaneously Victorian wooden structures and modern concrete. Vehicles on the street were both horse-drawn carriages and automobiles occupying the same space in an impossible visual contradiction. People walked past wearing both period clothing and contemporary dress, their forms flickering between versions. It was like reality couldn't decide which timeline to commit to, so it was trying to maintain both simultaneously. Margaret joined me at the window, gasping. "What did you do?" I created a third option, a third timeline. Now there are 3 censuses competing: the 1880 official count, the 1990 official count, and my census of the lost. Reality can't choose between them, so it's trying to honor all 3 at once. "Tom, look at yourself." I looked down at my hands and saw them phasing between versions. Young miner's hands, calloused and scarred. Middle-aged sheriff's hands, weathered but different. And something else, something that looked like an overlay of both, a hybrid that existed in the space between the 2 timelines. My reflection in the window showed the same thing. I was Thomas Whitaker, miner. I was Tom Whitaker, sheriff. And I was something new, something that existed in multiple timelines simultaneously, bound to none of them completely. "I'm becoming something else," I said quietly. "Not 1880, not 1990, but something between. Something that can see both timelines. Is that good? I don't know. But look at the town. It's stable now. Flickering, yes, but stable. Neither timeline is completely erasing the other. Maybe this is the solution. Maybe coexistence is possible." But even as I said it, I could see the strain. Buildings were starting to blur at the edges, like reality was having trouble maintaining such a complex paradox. People in the street were looking around in confusion, some of them crying out in distress as they flickered between versions of themselves. Thomas Mackenzie appeared beside us, materializing like he'd stepped through a door that wasn't there. He looked troubled, his form less solid than it had been days ago. Now he was flickering too. Sometimes the confident 1880 miner I'd first met, sometimes something more transparent, more uncertain. "Sheriff Whitaker, what have you done?" His voice sounded hollow, like it was echoing from far away. "I created a counter-narrative, a third census. Now there are 3 timelines competing instead of 2. You've destabilized everything. Reality wasn't meant to sustain multiple timelines. It's tearing apart at the seams." He gestured at the window, at the chaotic overlapping visions of Main Street. "This can't last. Something has to give. Good, let it give. I'm tired of timelines fighting. Let reality figure out which one it wants." "That's not how it works. Without a clear timeline, without a single authoritative count, everything breaks down. People will exist in fragments, scattered across multiple versions of themselves, never fully real in any of them. Is that what you want? Is that better than letting one timeline win? I looked at Margaret, saw her flickering between her elderly modern self and her young 1880 self, saw the confusion and fear in her eyes. I thought about Sarah, about Jenny, about all the people caught between timelines existing in multiple states at once. Maybe Mackenzie was right. Maybe I hadn't created a solution. Maybe I just created a more complex problem. There has to be a way, I said. There has to be a way for both timelines to be real without them destroying each other. There isn't. That's the fundamental rule of reality. Only one timeline can be authoritative. Only one census can be correct. The others have to be acknowledged as errors, as mistakes, as records of things that don't actually exist. But both timelines do exist. I've lived in both. I have memories from both. They're both real. Memories aren't reality, Sheriff. Official records are reality. And when official records contradict each other, reality breaks. That's what you're seeing outside. Reality breaking under the weight of contradictory documentation. Over the next several hours, the situation deteriorated. The flickering between timelines became more violent, more disorienting. People started reporting being in multiple places at once, having conversations with versions of themselves, seeing their homes transform around them. The strain of maintaining 3 competing timelines was becoming too much for reality to bear. By midnight, I knew Mackenzie was right. We couldn't sustain this. Something had to give, and if it didn't give soon, everyone in Custer County would be torn apart by the competing timelines, existing in fragmented states across multiple versions of reality. I had to make a choice, not between 1880 and 1990, but about which census would be acknowledged as authoritative. Which official count would be accepted as the true documentation of who existed in Custer County. I walked back to the hill where I'd first planned to burn one of the censuses. The 3 documents were still there, protected in a waterproof case: the 1880 official census, the 1990 official census, and my unauthorized census of the lost. As I stood there in the cold November night, watching reality tear itself apart in the valley below, I finally understood what needed to happen. But understanding and accepting were 2 different things, and what I needed to do would cost everything. Margaret found me there an hour later. She sat down beside me on the frozen ground, both of us watching the town flicker and phase below us. "You're going to burn them all, aren't you?" she said quietly. "All 3 censuses. How did you know?" "Because it's the only solution. If 3 competing censuses are tearing reality apart, then the answer is 0 competing censuses. No official count, no bureaucratic authority declaring who exists and who doesn't. Just people. Living or not living based on something other than documentation. Will that even work? Can reality exist without official records? People existed before there were censuses, Tom. For thousands of years, humans lived and died without anyone counting them, without anyone documenting them officially. Maybe we can go back to that. Maybe we don't need the government to tell us we're real. But what happens to everyone? If there's no census, no official count, do people just stop existing? I think they exist the way they always did. Through memory, through connections, through the actual physical presence in the world, not through paperwork. I pulled out the 3 census documents and laid them on the ground. The 1880 count that had started this nightmare by documenting people who'd died before they could be recorded as deceased. the 1990 count that had accidentally reinforced those 110-year-old records, giving them new life. And my own unauthorized count, my desperate attempt to save the people being erased. All three were real. All three were official. All three were tearing reality apart. If I burn these, I said slowly, I'm destroying federal records. That's a crime. Tom, I think we're well past worrying about crimes at this point. She was right, of course. I'd watched my wife be replaced by a ghost from 1880. I'd watched an entire town transform. I'd lived through my own identity fracturing into multiple versions. Whatever happened after this couldn't be worse than what we were already experiencing. I built a fire, carefully, using dry wood from the sparse trees on the hilltop. When it was burning well, I picked up the first document. My own census, the one I'd created to save the people being replaced. This one first, I said, because it was my mistake, my attempt to fix things that only made them worse. I fed it to the flames page by page, watching the names curl and blacken, watching my careful documentation of 151 lost people turn to ash. As it burned, I felt something inside me shift. One of my competing timelines faded, the hybrid version that had existed in the space between. I was becoming more solid, more singular, but I couldn't tell yet if I was Thomas or Tom. Next was the 1990 census, the modern count that had reinvigorated the 1880 records, that had accidentally given ghost citizens a path back to existence. This one was harder to burn. It represented the world I knew, the life I'd lived, everything that made me Sheriff Tom Whitaker instead of Minor Thomas Whitaker. But it had to go. For reality to stabilize, for the competing timelines to stop tearing everything apart, all the official counts had to be destroyed. I fed it to the flames. As it burned, I felt the modern timeline weakening. The memories of patrol cars and radio calls, of Jenny as a deputy and Sarah as a lawyer, all of them becoming less vivid, less real. I was losing my connection to 1990, losing my identity as Sheriff Tom Whitaker. Finally, I picked up the 1880 census. The original count, the one that had documented Thomas Whitaker, minor, and 150 other souls who'd died before they could be officially recorded as deceased. This was where it had all started. This was the document that had created the bureaucratic limbo, the ghost citizens, the entire nightmare. My hands hesitated. If I burned this, what would happen to me? The 1990 version was already weakening. If I destroyed the 1880 version too, would I cease to exist entirely? Would there be any version of me left? Margaret put her hand on my arm. Whatever happens, Tom, it's better than this. Better than being fractured across multiple timelines forever. I nodded and fed the 1880 census to the flames. As it burned, I felt everything shifting. The two primary timelines, 1880 and 1990, began to fade. But they didn't disappear completely. Instead, they seemed to merge, to fold into each other, creating something new. I was Thomas Whitaker and Tom Whitaker simultaneously, not competing anymore but integrated. All my memories from both timelines became part of a single, continuous experience. I remembered being a miner in 1880 and dying in the Aurora collapse. I remembered being a sheriff in 1990 and fighting to save my town from ghost citizens. Both were real. Both had happened, but now they existed as a complete narrative instead of competing stories. Below us, the town stopped flickering. Main Street settled into a stable form, but it wasn't purely 1880 or 1990. It was something in between, something that honored both timelines without being dominated by either. Buildings that showed their age, that carried marks of both eras, People who remembered multiple versions of themselves but weren't torn apart by the contradiction. It worked, Margaret breathed. Reality is stabilizing. But what year is it? I asked. If we destroyed all the censuses, all the official counts, what timeline are we in now? Maybe that's not the right question anymore. Maybe we're not in 1880 or 1990. Maybe we're just here, in a place where both timelines happened and both are remembered, but neither one dominates. We walked back down to the town as the sun rose. People were emerging from their homes, looking around in confusion but no longer in pain. The violent flickering had stopped, replaced by a gentler overlay, like looking at a watercolor painting where colors blend into each other without sharp boundaries. I found Sarah at our house. She was herself again, but with memories of both timelines. She remembered being the 1880 schoolteacher who died in the mine. She remembered being the 1990 lawyer. And somehow, impossibly, both versions existed together in her mind without tearing her apart. "Tom," she said, and I could hear both the frontier Sarah and the modern Sarah in her voice. "Is it over?" "I think so. The censuses are burned. There's no official count anymore. We exist outside of bureaucratic documentation now. So what are we? What timeline are we in? Our own. One where we remember both versions but aren't bound to either." She hugged me, and I held her. And we stood there as the sun rose over Custer County, Montana, in a year that couldn't be defined by any census, in a timeline that existed only because we'd chosen to let go of official reality. The nightmare was over, but we'd paid a price for ending it. We'd given up our certainty about who we were, about when we were, about what was real. We existed now in a space between censuses, in a reality that couldn't be officially documented. And maybe, I thought as I held my wife and watched the sun paint our strange hybrid town in shades of gold and pink, maybe that was exactly where we needed to be. Because official records had nearly destroyed us. Bureaucracy had torn reality apart. Documentation had made ghosts real and turned the living into data points. Sometimes, I realized, the only way to be truly alive is to exist outside the count entirely. To be uncounted, undocumented, officially non-existent, but real nonetheless. I stood on that hill with both census documents in my hands, the flames flickering between them, and I realized I couldn't choose. Not because both timelines deserved to exist, but because I finally understood what had really happened. The census hadn't counted wrong. We had. I walked back down to the town square where all 11,696 residents waited. The 1880 version and the 1990 version of Custer County overlaid on each other, flickering like a film projector switching between two reels. "I'm not going to burn either census," I announced. The crowd erupted, voices from both eras shouting, demanding I make a choice, afraid of the eternal limbo I was condemning them to. Thomas Mackenzie pushed through the crowd. "Sheriff, you have to choose. Reality can't exist like this. We're tearing apart at the seams." "No," I said, "you're not listening. The census didn't make a mistake. The count was right both times. The problem isn't the census. The problem is our assumption that only one timeline can be real." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying both counts are correct because they're counting different things. The 1880 census counted the people who existed before the mine collapse. The 1990 census counted the people who exist now. They're both real. They're both true. They're just separated by 110 years. That's impossible. We can't exist in both eras." "Why not?" "The census says you do. 2 official federal documents, both saying you exist, just at different times. The mistake wasn't the count. The mistake was thinking that being counted in 1880 meant you couldn't also be counted in 1990. Margaret stepped forward from the crowd. "Tom, what are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we accept both censuses as true. The 1880 count documents people who lived and died in 1880. The 1990 count documents their descendants, their successors, the people who filled the spaces they left behind. There's no contradiction, there's just continuation." "But the 151 who died in the mine," Sarah said, her voice coming from somewhere in the crowd. "They were counted, but never recorded as dead. That's the paradox. So, we fix it. We create the missing documents. Death certificates for all 151 people who died in the Aurora mine collapse, dated June 17, 1880. We close the bureaucratic loop that's been open for 110 years. Thomas Mackenzie stared at me. "You want to officially kill us? You are dead. You died in 1880. The problem is nobody ever filed the paperwork. So bureaucratically, you're still alive, still waiting to be resolved. That's why you could come back. That's why the 1990 census could count you again. The record was never closed. And if we close it, then you can rest. Your existence in 1880 will be complete. Born, lived, counted, died, all official, all documented. And the 1990 timeline can continue without you because you'll be properly deceased in the records." Margaret was nodding slowly. "It might work. If we create official death certificates backdated to 1880 and file them with the federal government, it would close the loop. The 151 would be officially recorded as deceased, no longer in limbo." "But we're here," Thomas said. "We're real. We exist right now. Do you? Or are you just a bureaucratic echo? A record that was never properly closed?" He looked down at his hands, watched them flicker between solid and transparent. "I don't know anymore. Sometimes I feel real. Sometimes I feel like I'm just paper. Just entries in a ledger." "That's because you are," I said gently. "You were turned into data when you were counted, made official. But you were never turned back into just a memory. You've been stuck between states. This gives you a way to complete the transition, to become what you should have become in 1880, history." The crowd was silent now, the 1880 residents looking at each other, understanding dawning on their faces. They'd been fighting to exist, but maybe existence wasn't what they needed. Maybe what they needed was completion. Resolution. An official end. "How do we do this?" Sarah asked. My Sarah, the 1880 school teacher, not my 1990 wife. "How do we create death certificates for people who died 110 years ago?" "We have the authority," I said. "I'm the sheriff. Margaret is the historian. We have access to the records, the archives, the official channels. We can create the documents, backdate them, and file them with the state and federal government. We can close the bureaucratic loop." Over the next 3 days, Margaret and I worked around the clock. We created 151 death certificates, one for each person who died in the Aurora mine collapse. We documented their names, ages, dates of death, cause of death. We used official forms, official seals, made everything as legitimate as possible. On December 3, 1990, we submitted all 151 death certificates to the Montana State Records Office with a cover letter explaining that these were corrections to historical records, deaths that had occurred in 1880 but were never properly filed due to the chaos following the mining disaster. The state accepted them, filed them, made them official, and the 1880 timeline began to fade. Thomas Mackenzie came to see me on the day the certificates were processed. He was already less solid, less real. I could see through him like he was made of smoke. "It's working," he said. "I can feel it, the pull, the resolution. We're finally being released. I'm sorry it took so long." "Don't be. We had 110 years longer than we should have. That's more than most people get." He looked around the sheriff's office, which had settled firmly into its 1990 version. "Will anyone remember us? The census will remember you. 2 census counts, 110 years apart. That's immortality, in a way. You'll exist in the federal records forever." He smiled. "That's something, I suppose. Being a statistic, being data. It's more than something. It's everything. Data outlasts life. Records outlast memory. You're more permanent than any of us will ever be." He reached out like he was going to shake my hand, but his form was too insubstantial now. "Thank you, Sheriff, for understanding, for giving us an ending." "You're welcome, Thomas." One by one, over the next week, all 151 of the 1,880 residents faded away. They smiled as they went, relief on their faces. They'd been trapped for 110 years, and now they were finally free to not exist, to be properly, officially dead. Sarah was one of the last to go, my 1880 Sarah, the schoolteacher. She sat with me in our kitchen the night before she faded. "Will your other Sarah come back?" she asked. "Your 1990 wife." "I hope so. If the transformation reverses, if the people who were replaced return, I hope she does. You deserve to be happy, to have a complete life, not a fractured one." "What about you? Are you happy to end?" She thought about it. "Yes, I think I am. Being in limbo was exhausting. Always existing but never being sure if I was real. Now I know. I existed in 1880. I died in 1880. And that's okay. That's complete." She faded that night, smiling, at peace. By December 10th, all 151 were gone. The town had stopped flickering. It was firmly 1990, with no trace of 1880 except in the historical records and in my memory. And slowly, gradually, the people who'd been replaced started coming back. Jenny appeared at the sheriff's office one morning, looking confused. "Tom, what happened? I had the strangest dream. I was a school teacher in 1880. "It wasn't a dream. You were transformed, replaced by your 1880 counterpart. But she's gone now, properly recorded as deceased. You're back." "How long was I gone?" 3 weeks. It felt like a lifetime, another lifetime, someone else's lifetime. She touched her badge, her gun, her radio like she was confirming they were real. "Am I really back?" "You're really back." Others returned over the following days. Deputy after deputy, citizen after citizen, coming back confused, disoriented, but intact. Their 1990 selves restored now that their 1880 counterparts were properly deceased in the records. My Sarah was one of the last to return. I came home from work on December 15th and found her in the kitchen, making coffee, looking at the walls like she was seeing them for the first time. "Tom, Sarah, you're back." She ran to me and we held each other for a long time. "I remember being her," she whispered. "The other Sarah. The teacher. I remember dying in the mine, visiting my brother, the collapse. But that wasn't me. That was the person you replaced, or who replaced you. But she's at peace now. Officially dead, officially resolved. And us? Are we real? According to the census, yes. We're counted. We're official. We exist. Is that enough?" I thought about it. About bureaucracy and data and official records. About how we'd fought a war of paper, of competing counts, of documentation trying to create reality. It has to be, I said. Because in the end, that's all we have. We're all just entries in a ledger, statistics, data points. The question is whether we accept that or fight it. And you've accepted it? I've accepted that existence is complicated, that we can be real and be data at the same time. That being counted doesn't make us less human. It just makes us official. On December 31st, 1990, I filed my final report on the incident. It was brief, intentionally vague. Census discrepancy resolved. Death certificates filed for 151 individuals previously unrecorded. County population confirmed at 11,696. No further action required. The state accepted the report. The Census Bureau sent a formal acknowledgement. The case was closed, but I kept the original 1880 census in my office, in a frame on the wall, a reminder of what had happened. Of the 151 people who'd existed in bureaucratic limbo for 110 years, who'd tried to reclaim their lives by replacing ours, and who'd finally found peace in official death certificates. In January of 1991, life returned to normal in Custer County. People went back to work, kids went back to school. Everyone tried to forget the month when reality had fractured and two timelines competed for existence. But I never forgot, and every time I saw a census form, every time I heard about the decennial count, I wondered how many other places had the census counted wrong, how many other communities had ghost citizens waiting in bureaucratic limbo, looking for a chance to become real again. I retired from the sheriff's office in 1995, 5 years after the incident. My successor, a young man named Robert Cole, asked me why I kept that old 1880 census on the wall. Reminder, I told him. Of what? That we're all just numbers, all just data in a system. And sometimes the system makes mistakes. When it does, reality breaks, and someone has to be there to fix it. That's dark, Tom. That's bureaucracy. Epilogue. April 2000. The 2000 census was being conducted. I was retired, living quietly with Sarah, when I got a call from Robert Cole. Tom, we've got a problem with the census. My blood ran cold. What kind of problem? Population discrepancy. They counted 11,847. We have 11,696 on record. It's off by 151. I closed my eyes. Are they the same 151 names? From 1880? Silence on the other end. Then, how did you know? Because death certificates can be filed, but census records are permanent. We closed the bureaucratic loop for 1880, but we didn't remove them from the original census. They're still there, still counted, still existing in the data. What do? You file more death certificates, and you do it every 10 years, every time they're counted again. Because once you're in the census, you're in forever. The data never forgets, the records never die. That's insane. That's bureaucracy. Welcome to the job, Sheriff Cole. I hung up and looked at Sarah. She'd been listening. They're back? She asked. They were never really gone, not from the records. The census is permanent. We can make them officially dead, but we can't make them uncounted. They'll show up every 10 years, forever. So we just file death certificates every decade? For the next century? Forever? Unless someone figures out how to delete federal census records, which nobody can. Once you're counted forever. She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. We're stuck in a bureaucratic loop, filing death certificates for ghosts every 10 years. Welcome to Montana, I said, where even the dead have to file paperwork. That night, I dreamed about Thomas Mackenzie. He was standing in a vast room filled with filing cabinets, each drawer containing census records from different years. He was looking through them, finding his name repeated over and over. 1880, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020. We're permanent now, he said, looking at me. More permanent than the living, because the living die and are forgotten. But census data is forever. We exist in the records across all time. We've achieved a kind of immortality. Is that what you wanted? No, but it's what we got, and it's enough. Because, in the end, Sheriff, we're all just trying to be remembered, and the census remembers everything. I woke up to Sarah shaking me. Tom, you were talking in your sleep about the census. Sorry, bad dream. Or maybe a good one. I can't tell anymore. Do you think they're at peace, the 151? I think they're as much at peace as anyone can be when they exist as data. They're recorded. They're official. They're permanent. That's a kind of peace. And us? Are we at peace? I looked at the clock, 3:33 a.m. December date, but I couldn't remember which year. Did it matter? We were counted in 1990, we'd be counted again in 2000 and 2010, and every decade until the census stopped or we died. We're counted, I said. That's all we can be. Counted and official and real in the only way that matters. Is that enough? It has to be. Because in America, in the modern world, that's all reality is. Data, records, official counts. She lay back down beside me. I hate that you're right. So do I. They're still there, by the way, the 151st. Every census they show up. Custer County population always comes in at 11,847 instead of 11,696. The state files death certificates. The federal government acknowledges them. The count continues. Because once you're in the census, you're in forever. And the census never forgets, even when it counts wrong. Especially when it counts wrong. The end. The following is an excerpt from the 2020 Census Bureau Field Manual, Section 47, Subsection Q. In certain jurisdictions, enumeration may encounter individuals who appear in historical records, but claim not to exist in current timeline. Enumerators should count these individuals anyway, as census policy is to document all persons encountered during official enumeration period, regardless of their claimed temporal origin. See also, Custer County Protocol, established 1990. The Custer County Protocol is real. The Census Bureau has an official procedure for dealing with historical individuals who appear during modern counts. They count them, because bureaucracy doesn't distinguish between the living and the dead. It only distinguishes between the counted and the uncounted. And once you're counted, you're real, forever.